We have been talking about the 23rd Psalm, the Shepherd of Life Psalm, all week long. And there are all kinds of psalms. Actually, I suppose everybody has a psalm of their own life. It's what you build your life around, actually. That's the psalm of your life, whether it's the 23rd Psalm or whether it's anything else. And there was a man called Unknown, and he wrote his own 23rd Psalm, and it goes like this. The analyst is my shepherd. I may always be in want. He maketh me to lie down on green couches. He redistributeth my libido and leadeth it in paths of normality for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the turmoils of emotional conflict, I will fear no evil, for the transference is with me. His explanations and encouragement, they comfort me. He prepareth my mind to accept reality. He defrosteth my libido. My praise runneth over. Surely a good mess of money will follow him all the days of his life, even if I dwell in the almshouse forever. But I think that actually everybody actually does make their own 23rd Psalm up as they go along, and I think that we remake it time after time after time as we gain more experience. This more experience goes into it, and through the disciplines of life, we really begin gradually, little by little, to find out what are the strong things that give us strength and that make life good. And I can imagine that you will have the experience of this little girl. I don't know how little she is, in her teens, I suppose she is. But anyway, I received this letter yesterday or the day before, and she had seen me at the Finger Lakes camp. And she says, the first 3 or 4 days after we got home from Finger Lakes, we were all very nice to each other. My sister and I didn't fight hardly at all, and we were almost perfect angels. After a while, we got back to normal, and it wore off. The only thing that stayed with me is that I feel a little more guilty about the things I do than I used to before CFO. What I'd like to know is, why can't we be like the way we were the first few days after CFO? Does that happen to you? Or are you that wonderful all the time? Well, I mean, there are some of us have it, I guess, and some of us don't. Well, I can remember, I don't know, this is a year ago or whenever it was, I was at home and I was, when my kids are nice, and everything else, they're just like me. Of course, they act like Marion quite a bit also. But anyway, Katie had done I don't know what, and I was really laying down the law. And in her own fashion, she looked at me in a rather jaundiced way, and she said, anybody would think you were God. Now, how did she know that? This whole thing about it, we get here to camp, and you remember that at the beginning of camp, we gave thanks by faith. And this is a thing, you walk by faith. You don't walk by feelings. If you're going to walk by feelings, I mean, you're going to be up and down like a roller coaster all the time. What you feel like, it depends upon many things. What you ate, how much sleep you had, and I mean, there's just a lot of things which go into it, as well as the kind of thoughts that you feed on. I mean, feelings go, but what we forget is that feelings are a result of something. Feelings, and get that straight, feelings are a result of something else. Follow the disciplines, whatever the disciplines are. Lose yourself in whatever it is you're going to lose yourself, and the feelings will naturally follow. Sometimes we get the idea that we should have the feeling that we ought to be spiritual, that we ought to be riding on the top of the wave, and we're determining our conduct and everything else by feelings. And if you're going to do that, you're going to have a lousy, rotten life. It just isn't going to be good. We like to think that God is personal, and He is, but aren't you glad that God is law also? That He is just as predictable as the tides of the ocean, or the particular place where galaxies and stars happen to be, and where you know they'll be next year, be the same yesterday, today, and forever. Aren't you glad that God isn't what we oftentimes term or mean by being personal, meaning that some mornings He gets up out of the wrong side of the bed? So, where it says in Scripture, we walk by faith, this is not some kind of a religious precept that some symposium of priests or whatever it is happen to dream up. This is a reflection of life. This is somebody looking at life and said, this is what life really is. Therefore, in some fashion, this is what the nature of God is. So the thing about it is, do it whether you feel like it or not. And with all the things that we have said about Rufus Moseley, many times, and all of the wonderful things that we've said about him, I had roomed with Rufus over the years at camps many, many times. And sure, he was always saying, Jesus, 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 hallelujah, blessed singer of Israel, and I don't know, this goes on, and it was just like a broken record going on and on. Well, when he was really, when this was real to him, when he was, as they say, in the Spirit, there was no question in your mind. I mean, this was just elation and joy and ecstasy going up. But I've been with him mornings when when that old record was just going round and round, and he was still saying the same things. I mean, the words were there, but the music wasn't with it yet. And you could tell when that switch over happened. All of a sudden, the same thing, but man, this had life, this had spirit. He did it whether he felt like it or not, and by doing it, the feelings came afterwards. Now, we've been all bound together here for a week. Everybody has been sort of binding and securing everybody else. And we've had so many people to cuddle, and all that. It's great. I'm for it. But when you go back to Main Street, whatever Main Street is, in the first place, they aren't going to do it to you, and you better not do it to everybody either. You're going to get yourself into trouble. So, there has to come this inner development of a discipline. You go to a music concert, and all of a sudden you go in there, and a year separated from everybody else, and you're looking around at everybody else, and there's a ceiling, and there's lights, and there's walls, and the orchestra's up there, and all this stuff, and I mean, you're just a complete one little ego, one little stranger ego, actually, within a whole mass. But sometime in that concert, if it goes right, you're going to become one with that music. And when you've lost yourself, joy and happiness come. That's a result also of something. And as I have said to a few people here, the big difference between Jesus, between the spiritual life And the psychological life is that the psychological life says major in yourself. Know thyself. Run around in yourself. Monkey around with your ego until you begin, until all over you begin to feel like an ingrown toenail. It hurts. But Jesus said, lose yourself. There's an awful lot of difference. And it's in the losing of yourself, whether it's in the losing of yourself in studying, or whether it's in the losing of yourself in work, or whether it's in the losing of yourself in making cookies or dough or scrubbing floors or whatever else it is, or singing, or just making the calls that you have to make in business every day. When you lose yourself in it, why, you are a different person. You're really not there, and joy and you achieve more with that joy that comes. This is life. It's true not because it's in the Bible. It's true not because religion has made it a precept. It's true because it's a true reflection of what life really is. And this is what we're talking about anyway. This is what we're after. We're not after religion. We're after life. We're after reality. We're after truth. And this will release you into whatever it is that you will. We oftentimes feel that if we could get to the point there, that we would be riding on cloud nine all the time, and that we would never lose our temper or get angry and so on and so forth. Well, I was in a home in Hollywood, about a couple of years back, and this woman was saying, Jesus was perfect, Jesus was perfect, he was perfect, he was perfect. And I would say to her, what do you mean by this? And there was a reason why I was goading her. I said, what do you mean he was perfect? How was he perfect? Well, he was perfect. I said, all right, he was perfect. How was he perfect? Well, she could, but just like once more like a broken record. He was perfect, perfect. I said, do you mean by that he was always calm? And yes, he was always kind. He had the children on his lap. Yes, absolutely. And he had always a perfect wisdom. He knew what he was doing, and he knew where he was, yes, and that his dreams came true, yes, and all this. I said, well, for Pete's sake, go back and read the Gospels, for that isn't in there. He knew frustration. He knew what it was to be hurt. He knew what it was to be swept with anger. He knew what it was to doubt. He knew what it was to do all of the things that we condemn ourselves for doing, and we call it sin. Why don't we call it sin in him? Yet it says he was without sin. I be lifted, an awful big if there, boy. And he says, woe unto you, and he goes through that whole chapter on woes to the city. He said, if the same things had been done in Sodom and Gomorrah that had been done in you, they would have repented, but you wouldn't. And how does it end? It ends just exactly the same way that it ends with you and me. We get driven to our knees once more, and we get driven to the source. We have substituted our own desires and ambitions for something that is beyond us. And then he has to say once more, where it says, in all things give thanks. Not only in the things that you like, but in the things that you don't like. Even so, Father, it seemed good in your sight. I once more commit myself into your keeping and into your care. I don't know why this is. If I had my way, it would be different, but there must be a reason for I gave myself to you, and it's got to be a good reason. Therefore, I give you thanks. Bow your knee once more. And you're going to do it many, many, many times. But the end result is going to be better. It's going to be bigger. So I think these are things that happen. Oftentimes you will hear people say, oh, you go off to that church or to that conference or whatever it is, and you come back and you're riding on cloud nine. Look at you now. Well, you could say that. Name anything else in the world that you couldn't say the same thing about. Or they say, she had a so-called spiritual healing once. Look at her now. Well, I know that I have seen, without any question, No question in my mind at all. Many people that have, where there was no question that they had a spiritual. I saw a woman who had palsy for I don't know how long. I mean, she couldn't hold a cup of coffee in her hand. And I saw her prayed. She was prayed for. And for 3 days she walked around with coffee and everything else. But the one thing that I told her was, don't say anything to anybody else. Under no circumstance. Well, this just got to the point where she was just going to blow her top. She got on a cockeyed phone, morning, noon, and night. Couldn't she tell somebody? Couldn't she do this? Couldn't she do that? And I said, one. Well, before, I don't know, the fourth or fifth day was over, shoot, I'd say half of the Twin Cities knew it. And in a few days when I saw her, she was just going like that. There's a reason, not that you should never tell anybody, but there's a reason at times when you should. There is only so much energy, there is only so much power, there's only so much life in you. Now you can dribble that power off through your lips if you want, and satisfy it. You can dribble it off there, or like a kettle, you can put that lid on there, and whatever the intention of your mind is, it will manifest there. In healing or whatever else it is. But she was healed. Well, you can say the same thing about, you can say exactly the same thing about going to a doctor's office. If you say, well, I went to the doctor last year with a cold, by golly, here, this year I've got it, this medicine stuff just doesn't work. Or whatever else it is, you know. It's there, it's real, and it is true. I think that one of the very basic things that you have to remember, and that you will remember, for there will be, because of our culture, because of our rearing, because of our past, because of what we are, is that oftentimes we feel that we're only loved if we are, when we are doing what is right. And what is right, a lot of times, is anybody's guess. Because what is right oftentimes is dependent on our culture. It depends upon what time we happen to be living in. And I'm not speaking of the difference between now and 1500. I'm speaking of the difference between now and 1960 maybe, or 1963. How fast is everything is changing. You better make a big difference. Differentiation in your mind between legality, morality, and spirituality, because while they may be related, they are not the same things whatsoever. Your moral code is a social solution to problems that are faced by society. And these moral codes change periodically and are constantly in a state of flux, depending upon the society which you're in, or the part of the world which you're in, or even if you're in the same one in probably just different years. Our laws change constantly. Spirituality, I say, is an individual's relationship with God. And I'm not speaking of a creed there either, and I'm not speaking of a church there either. I'm speaking of something very personal, very intimate. Jung, and I forget the book which it is, but it's the difference between the mass mind and the individual mind. And he is showing in this book how about politics and business and everything else, how that these great structures of society are trying to pound everybody into the same mold. And that the individuality, and that a reason for a lot of the mental and emotional problems that we're having is that we're all being pounded into one mold. And he goes, and he says, even in the church, that a creed is the result of a group. And it would have to, within any particular structure, whether it's Presbyterians or Lutherans or whatever, it would have to be taken the whole a range of experts in that church, from your liberals on one side to your conservatives on your other, to your high church at one extreme to your low at the other, and they'd all have to sit around a table and come out with a statement, a social statement, or a statement made by social means that will satisfy everybody so that everybody can read it and they can read into it, each one, just what they want. He says this is like a political structure also, but he says there's one thing that man must have, and then he puts it this way: an extra mundane, intimate, personal relationship within himself for him to be healthy and for him to elicit all the potentialities and possibilities that are within him. To know that God loves you was one of the great turning points in my life, and that was the first thing that I wrote, was God really loves you. And I think if I had only one message to give ever, it would be that God loves you and that God is love, that he doesn't have love like I have love. I can get mad, I can be up and I can be down, and it can come and go, and I can maybe put it on like I put on a shirt or like I put on a sweater or whatever else it is, but God is love, is the very essence of love. And that came to me, or the impetus for that whole thing came to me a long time ago when I was working in a professional way in psychology. And you know, there are not many, individuals can only do so much that's wrong, and it's pretty limited also. I mean, you just go around, what are the possibilities of what's wrong? And really, you're not in that kind of business long before, I mean, there isn't anything that anybody could say that could possibly make you raise an eyebrow. It's the same old story over and over and over and over and over again. The characters are different and the stage settings are, but it's the same old story. And all that it is you get to the point so fast. And if there's one thing that I'm so glad about, for what psychology I had, it was never to sit in judgment on anybody. And that's been the greatest thing that has happened. Not moral judgment, not legal judgment, not any kind of it. Your job is to get the story and help. Period. And after I'd been in this for some time, I was in my office one day, and I was thinking, well, you know, if a human being can get to this point so fast, what about God? Good night, after all these, I don't know, millions or billions of years. Do you really think you could take God out on a Saturday night and shock him? I mean, really? Even if he were an idiot and imbecile. This thing has been repeated so often, so awfully often. And all that I know is this, is that with the more understanding, the less condemnation there can be. That it is no wonder that people act as they act, that it would be a wonder if they didn't act as they act when you know the story. And therefore, the great thing about where it says, in him there is no condemnation, to me is just literal fact. And I used to be afraid when I was a kid, used to hear all these sermons about that someday God would judge you, you know, and I go, oh boy, who can stand before the judgment of God, you know, and all that stuff, and make you break out in a cold sweat. You know, that's the greatest comforting promise that I know in the Bible now. That someday we will be judged by God. Because if God is all that we say, he is infinite understanding. And with infinite understanding is infinite love. And I'd hate like hell to be judged by anybody else. Literally. I don't want to be judged by anybody. I want to be judged by God. And I'm glad that's in the Bible now. So you will go back and you'll find that there's all kinds of things that happen and so on. And you may wish, oh, if I could stay here. You know what this would be like if you could stay here. And there are some communities where this has happened. And the spirituality gets to be more fine, and you get totally unrelated to the world and to life and to soil and to dirt and everything else. And then the religion becomes an escape from reality. As, I don't know, it was Marx or who it was that said, an opiate of the people. It is life. And we need these periods, just as you need them in business, just as you need them in the army, and you get drawn back to the rear areas, and you get your vision, and you have a rest, and you get your vision, whether it's for patriotism or repolished up, and suddenly life falls into place once more, and you go back. It isn't only that you do it in religion, we do it in every area of life. It's good. And if you stayed here too long, I can't think of anything worse. Much as I love you, I mean really. There is a story about an old Scottish elder who lived away up in the Highlands of Scotland. And he had been an elder in the Presbyterian Church for I don't know how long, 50 years or whatever. And he had served so faithfully that the people decided that they would take up a collection without him knowing it, and they would send him down to the national meeting of their church, which is the General Assembly, which is held every year in Edinburgh. And there you have all the great divines from all over the world come, and I mean, they thought, well, goodness sake, this would be the highlight of his life to send him there. So they did. He went and he came back, and he went right back to his farm, and he didn't say anything to anybody. And of course, everybody was waiting expectantly to hear about the whole thing. And he didn't say anything. This went on for a couple of months, and they didn't know what to make of it. Finally, a committee from the church called on him, and they said, Sandy, what did you think of the General Assembly in Edinburgh? Oh, he says, it was just wonderful. It was these great divines from all over the world. And he says there were so many of them. But he said, you know, I've been a farmer all my life. And he said, you know, you take a wee piece of manure and you put it in the ground here, and you put a piece over there and a piece there, and you spread it all over the field, and it does so much good. But my goodness, when you gather it all together in one pile, it's fair obnoxious. So isn't it good that you're going to get away from all this before it gets obnoxious? All that I know is that you're going to live life like anybody else does, whether it's in this age or in any other age. You're going to have to learn what it is to fall on your face and get up, but you will never be the same. Like this girl said here, now when she acts in that way, at least she has a feeling of guilt over it. New worlds have been opened to you. Ignorance is not always bliss. Even though there are times when you wish that you had never. You wish at times that you didn't know what you know. That has happened to me. I remember I used to use fear. He was my buddy. I could use the fact that I was afraid to get out of anything that I didn't want to do. You know, I stuttered and so on and so forth. And then one day I was reading the story of the talents. And one man was given 10 and the other, I don't know, 6 or 8. And it gets down to the man that has 1. And you know how that thing ends. The man that has 10 has made 10 more. And the master says, well done, good and faithful servant, enter into what? I don't know, into your reward or whatever else it is. And the guy that has 6, he gets 6 more, enter into your reward. And the guy with 2, enter into your, he got 2 more. But the man with 1, and that's a story that I never did like. He said, he went and he hid it in the ground, and he gave him back just what he had. And he's condemned for it, and what he had is taken away from him, and he's cast out. But, read that thing over. What does the man say? He said, I was afraid, and I went, and I buried the talent in the ground, for I knew that you were a hard master, reaping where you didn't sow, and so on and so forth. You know the story of that man's life is that I was afraid, and the whole point of the article is that fear is no excuse. If you want to be afraid, but doggone it, get up and do what you have to do anyway. If you want to feel inferior, or if you are inferior, all right, feel that way if you want, but get up and do what you have to do anyway. And you know, when I read that and that suddenly flashed on my mind, that thing, you know, I wish to God I had never read it. He took away my chief excuse. And I had made friends with that excuse over so many years. And all of a sudden I couldn't use it anymore. And the fact that I knew within my own heart that I couldn't use it, that's when I began to work out of it. Little by little, by little, by little, by sweat, just like everybody else does. So, you have everything that you'll ever need within you. And one of the experiences that I had years ago, I don't know, 1938, yeah, it is, April 7th, 1938. Dr. George Washington Carver talked in the chapel of the college I was at, Macalester College in St. Paul. And I can't imagine, a greater man, and yet as far as public speaking went, I mean, he had nothing. But I tell you right now, everybody sat on the edge of their chair, and they were straining to hear every word that old man said. Greatest, and what he used to recite in a little high-pitched voice. And you know, his story is marvelous. He told God, he made a vow with God that if God would see him through college, that he would spend the first hour of every day with him. And when he went to Iowa State College, in order to keep his vow, there were mornings that he had to get up at 3 o'clock or 2:30 in the morning, for he was a janitor among everything. But he kept that tryst with his Mr. Creator. Nothing ever stood in its way. So as an old man looking back on his life, and he loved this thing that I'm about to read, and you can see that this meant so much to him over all his life. And maybe it condensed in just a little bit what he had learned about life and the thing that had driven him on to become what he was. And the title of the poem is Equipment. Figure it out for yourself, my lad. You've all that the greatest of men have had. 2 arms, 2 hands, 2 legs, 2 eyes, and a brain to use if you would be wise. With this equipment, they all began. So start for the top and say, I can. Look them over, the wise and great. They take their food from a common plate, and similar knives and forks they use. With similar laces they tie their shoes. The world considers them brave and smart, but you've all they had when they made their start. You can triumph and come to skill. You can be great if you only will. You're well equipped for the fight you choose. You have arms and legs and a brain to use. And the man who has risen great deeds to do began his life with no more than you. You are the handicap you must face. You are the one who must choose your place. You must say where you want to go, how much you will study the truth to know. God has equipped you for life, but He lets you decide what you want to be. Courage must come from the soul within. The man must furnish the will to win. So figure it out for yourself, my lad. You were born with all that the great have had. With your equipment they all began. Get hold of yourself and say, I can. And I think that that's a large extent as to what the gospel is all about. There's a lot of good news there for anybody. No matter who it is or what it is. And happy are you if you find out, if you learn, if you accept the experience of others. Not that you're going to be a mimic of others. But like it says, when Elisha finally, when the mantle fell, and he took the mantle of Elijah and he rolled it up and he went back to the river where just a short time before the old prophet who had been swept up by the chariot of fire, the old prophet had gone and hit that river with his mantle and it had parted and they had walked over. And Elisha, the young guy, he comes and he takes it and rolls it up just as he saw the old man do. And he said, where is the God of Elijah? And he smote that river and he walked over. And the prophets that stood afar off said, the spirit of Elijah has fallen on Elisha. Elisha wasn't going to be the same as him, but the spirit. So you get the same spirit, and whatever your personality is, doesn't matter whether you're tall, fat, short, or whatever else it is, you get the spirit of Lincoln, and people will say, that little fat, short man reminds me of Abraham Lincoln if you have his spirit.